Hello and welcome to Drilling Insight. I'm Jeremy Verdusco, host and editor of the Driller magazine. I'm joined today by drilling trainer, the driller writer, and co-host, Brock Yorty. How's it going, Brock?
It's doing okay. I'm in Central Florida and it's cold. They're talking about falling iguanas. I thought they were just messing with the Yankee.
Well, we're going to get a bunch of snow here tonight, so I guess I'm not sure which is better, falling iguanas or snow. So on today's show, we welcome Stuart Smith. Thanks for being on the show, Stuart. And so in Stuart's role as a partner in Ohio-based groundwater science, he diagnoses and solves well problems and performs water supply hydrology. But we brought him on today to talk about his work bringing water to underserved areas of Tanzania. Through Groundwater Tanzania Limited, Smith helps manage and plan water infrastructure projects in that country. GWT is now a turnkey operation from geophysical survey to site wells, the drilling, testing, water system construction, the whole gamut. So first, let's launch into our usual opening question. Stuart, did you choose the industry or did it choose you?
Well, it's a little bit of both. Is that I grew up with a mechanical genius father who did plumbing and electrical and mechanical and everything, and among the things that we did was pulling and setting pumps. So I worked at that a lot, and I got a lot of brown and black stuff on my hands back then. But being that I was more academically inclined, I didn't stick with that right away. Went to college, thought I'd be a science teacher. After a year and a half of that, decided I didn't like it anymore, and I got a job with what was then the National Water Well Association as a trainer and technical specialist. So I was back into it, learned what all the brown and black was on my hands back then, and made what I call my life of slime, since then. So it kind of circled back into it. And what's interesting from a Tanzania standpoint is about 1981, 82, I was corresponding with a driller with what was then the government drilling company who wanted to come over here and get some training. We never got that done, but, it was sort of an introduction back, way back that that sort of came around again unexpectedly later.
So tell me about your role working overseas. How did you choose to work in Africa and those areas?
Yeah, that was somewhat indirect. I'm a Lutheran Christian, and our churches in Northwest Ohio are at that time were linked with the Dodoma Diocese in central Tanzania. And so some of us went there to visit. And Dodoma is one of those high, dry places, sort of like, let's say, New Mexico, quite a bit like that. And so water, of course, is an issue. And you get to know people and start talking and discussing. And then I was advising on water projects from a distance independently for a while. But my current business partner asked me to get involved in managing water projects at about 2012 or so, and that's how I got connected with that. But I only work in Tanzania. I haven't worked anywhere else, other than sort of tangentially. That may change, but it's a big enough country in its own right.
So let's compare and contrast, working in Tanzania versus the States. What challenges do you see there? For example, with challenges in hiring or getting the right technology that maybe some of our drillers here in the US would relate to or not? What's going on over there?
Well, there's a lot of it that's actually quite similar to, particularly the parts of the United States, which everything is spread out and low population density, where, it's not unusual to go 400, 500 miles to go get a drilling tool or something. It's not that unusual. And actually the logistical supply chain is better than you would think it would be because of the international connections there. So you do have to plan out. Everything is, it's a long ways between everything, so it's 6 hour drive to down to 6 or 8 hour drive plus 2 hours sitting in traffic at Dar es Salaam if you have to go down there for something. And you don't want to forget anything, you have to go out to the job site. Maybe this is the only time of year you can ford that river to get over there. And so you better get it done before the floods come back up again. And it's that kind of situation.
So you mentioned a couple, but on the kind of flip side, what are some of the challenges? Like you'd mentioned having to drive 400 miles to get a tool. Like, are there other exceptional things about working in Tanzania that would just kind of blow the minds of contractors working here in the U.S.?
Yeah, see, that's the thing is Tanzania, as opposed to maybe other places in Africa, is just not that difficult. It's relatively peaceful.
Mm-hmm.
There's a fuel stop everywhere where everything's diesel. You can get stuff flown in. It's not like some kind of caricature of deepest, darkest Africa. Mm-hmm. Despite what the State Department says, the crime rate is not, exceptionally high. Any worse in Florida, as far as I'm concerned. And for me, the language barrier, of course, is an issue. People generally speak and think in Swahili, and it's a running joke all day long in Swahili that I'm not getting, and when I'm there. So and the young guys, they can rip back and forth between English and Swahili like just without even taking a breath, and that's really really impressive for me when I mix up my bad Spanish and my bad Swahili in that little part of my brain where it goes, and so that's communication. Plus, people in the rural are often just really, really don't know much about the rest of the world or how things are going. It can be, so it's very contrast. Some places are very cosmopolitan. Some places are, we heard there's things called buses, that level of thing, and people walk everywhere, ride a bike or something like that. So it's just a lot of contrast.
Okay. So you're I presume working in some pretty remote areas. Describe the types of drillers you're working with. Do you bring your own home, bring talent from home, or do you train up local folks? Describe to me how you're working.
Well, one of the advantages of working around Dodoma is that there's a pool of experienced drillers that we can rely on. For example, the Drilling and Dam Construction Agency, which is a sort of quasi-private, it used to be the government drilling company, was always been based there.
Yeah.
Then there are some other church-related and so on drilling companies that have been active for a while. So Naftal Mondi, my business partner, he just chatted up some of these guys that were looking for something different, and we have an experienced drilling crew. They didn't go to school for it or anything. They learn it.
Yeah.
My experience with a lot of mechanical people in Tanzania is that they're highly observant and systematic and pick things up very quickly. So it's not been a huge challenge to hand a brand new drilling rig over to them. So
speaking of rigs and drill crews, how do they structure them over there? How many guys are on a job? Is it similar to what we do here, or how does that work in Swahili?
Well, it's the rig we have is 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 hands-on. We don't have carousels and so on. So it's more looks like uh, typically a 4 or 5 person drilling crew. So there's one driller, one main offsider, and other people that are schlepping pipe around.
Yeah.
And so something like that. And it's I think it's very hierarchical watching it in action. The driller's in charge. Naf and he reports to Naftel, and then the other guys report to him, and so it's like that. They work pretty well since they know each other pretty well.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know how else to describe it.
Okay, so you obviously have a lot of experience in hydrology, and a lot of that, I'm sure, relies on data. How do you find good local data there when you're looking to build a well?
Well, if you're lucky, you've accessed a borehole drilling report that's relevant to the area in the background. There's pretty extensive files of borehole drilling reports. The downside of that is that they file them numerically instead of geographically. So really, whether that's changed or not, I think they're working into putting everything into GIS, but typically you don't really know. There's a lot of areas that have never been drilled, and so therefore we're reliant on a general understanding of the geology and also geophysics. All drilling sites for community water supplies, like a village water supply or a school or something, they are to be sited using geophysics. So it's typically what they call a granitic basement sort of situations. Typically, it's granite metamorphics, stuff like that. You have dikes intrusions and so on. It's not very seldom is it an alluvial situation or where we drill, but down on the coast, it's limestones and sandstones. So it's more like, say, the Midwest or something like that, only tropical.
So putting your scientist hat on, your hydrogeologist hard hat, do you guys do any, topographical, looking at the topography as you're looking at where a site is going to be, or is it mostly just exploration wells?
We're looking at the topography. Typically, it's because of the geology. We're using magnetics and resistivity. So they go over with a magnetic survey. Then they go over likely spots with the resistivity lines. We're also looking at the terrain, where vegetation is growing. Certain types of trees grow in water fractures. It's a combination of those things, and then finally, then you drill it and see what you get. But the geophysics in particular is definitely narrowing down, reducing the dry hole problem.
So you have. Can you walk me through a little bit, like how do you determine the parameters for well construction, or maybe, I guess, more straightforward, walk me through the process. Who's your customer? How do you get demand? How does a request come into you and go through the process where there's a finished well at the other side?
Well, we have a very customer base. It may be anything from, say, a church in the United States that decides to pay for a well for a school or a village that they're acquainted with in Tanzania. It may be a private enterprise like a farm or a winery. We work for Water Mission, and we've worked for the Norwegian Refugee Agency, and also the NORAID, the churches, the Scandinavian church conglomerate. So it's sort of like a combination of those things. Probably be drilling some wells for the new railroads and pipelines that are going in. And but somebody taps you to do that work, you work out the budget. If we go into an unknown area, what we try to do is go in and do the survey first, before we charge them for a lot of money, to get the survey done. Yeah, it looks like a pretty good site, or no, this is really going to be dry. It's not worth you trying to do it, or are we going to put a power pump on it, or can we get by cubic meter per hour with a hand pump? Work up a budget, do the mobilizing, and get through it. But once we see what kind of water we have, then we work up the budget and the parameters for what the water system construction is going to be. For example, if it's cubic meter per hour, we're putting a hand pump on it. If it's that's 3 to 5 gallons per minute. If it's a good water supply, and up in the central part, it's deep. That's hard on hand pumps. We prefer power pumps, and increasingly we're preferring solar pumps as much as possible. It's just, life is hard enough for these women, that they have to go out there and hammer on that handle, get their water, let alone everything else. If you guys are funding something, just put a power pump on it, for crying out loud. Train somebody how to operate it. Is it your mom and your sister out there schlepping water back to the house? That's the way we look at it.
That's really interesting. So, a few weeks ago, we had Jim Smith on from Fleming College, and he talked about Canada's regulations from one coast to the other. We know how the regulations are in the States, from you living in Ohio to me living in Michigan to Florida. What do regulations look like in Tanzania? What is it honor system on you understanding isolation distances and good well construction practices, or are there some actual codes that you have to follow?
There are indeed codes, regulations, and guidelines. For example, there are licensing requirements for well contractors. There are licensing requirements for qualified geoscientists. There's you go through a process to get approval for and license a borehole. Then there are guidelines on how to do things. I would say it's very comparable to most state regulations here in the United States. The one difference that I'm a little bit not used to is that when we work in hard rock country here in central United States, we typically finish an open borehole, but their rules there are to case everything. Now, that doesn't mean everybody does, but that's the rules. You case and screen it all and gravel pack it all, which has its pluses and minuses. I see why they decide to do it, but some places I'd rather not. I'm drilling through 80 meters of clean granite. Like, why are we closing this off with the millimeter screen? But then some places are collapsible. So you're going to want to do that.
So the regulation says no open hole construction, an open rock well. You're not just casing through and, cementing and then having that open end. They want a screen and gravel pack in there.
Yeah, it's very, they've got a lot of European influences, and that's more typical in Europe. They just screen everything. And so as far as efficiency goes, we're probably probably losing a lot because of it's that you're running a millimeter slot screen with filter pack in it, and that's going to be a lot less efficient than an open borehole from putting my hydrogeologist hat back on.
So you've been at this for a while. Can you tell us about a tool or an aspect of this that you find invaluable for getting this type of work done?
Well, one tool would be I would call it the geophysical suite. Just knowing where to drill, that depends on having some intelligence ahead of time. Once we have that, then you can make a lot of good decisions about your drilling. I'll stick another one in that we've learned since then is casing advancement.
Yeah.
We have a robot CRS type system, and particularly in the metamorphics in the West, it's proved itself invaluable. Before we had that, they did bury a hammer and about 50 meters of pipe, and that's no fun at all, especially since
yeah, particularly if you have to drive hundreds of miles to get replacements.
So that we're one of the few that actually have a full-flown casing advancing system, and it's already proved itself out, good investment.
So one of the reasons I wanted to have you on, Stuart, is the global water crisis is very, important to me and our education through the industry. And we have some U.S. drillers that get involved on, projects overseas. And you kind of alluded a bit to this a moment ago on well construction practices and, going in and doing it right. What is your advice to a U.S. driller that wants to volunteer some time and go over and help? What would you tell them?
Well, I do your homework ahead of time. I do it on the basis of having a relationship with people somewhere, wherever you are. I'm aware of them, for example, from following the Water Well Guys group on Facebook, and some of them, they've worked it out where they're working with local drillers or something like that. It's anymore, don't assume that there's nobody doing the work. In other words, if you find out there's an indigenous company, it's like, think of it your way. Do you want somebody from China to bring a drilling rig and plump themselves down in the middle of your territory and start drilling wells? It works the same way there. A lot of places you really don't need to go there and do it, but you can be a facilitator and an advisor, perhaps come alongside them, in some financial way to help. Financing is a big problem. There's a lot of people, they just can't get the financing to do what needs to be done. Like buying a six-figure drilling rig is beyond the capability, and like where we are, drilling with cable tool is I've seen it. I've seen the results of it. Now you got to put your hat off to those people for the patience they must have had. And so what I've been able to do is help organize the financing for this operation, so we don't have to go to the Russian mafia and pay 30%, and stuff like that. So it helps. That's some way to do it. Be an advisor, come alongside, but you don't necessarily have to do it. I've seen it work. Some places where they come in and form a company, and we, that's what we have. And so it's, just don't assume that you have to do it yourself.
That's wonderful insight. Obviously, drillers, we're a proud industry, and we have egos. and what, now here, I hadn't thought about it, but here I am, the North American Yankee showing up in somebody else's, world. And this is the way we do it in America, and this is the way you should be doing it here. And it's about the collaboration. And I love calling this a tribal industry, but that's their tribe, and we're coming to visit. And that's great. Thank you for that insight.
I have that problem myself, like this is the way it's done, and sometimes like pumping tests is still a work in progress where we are, is getting it done right. I can't be there enough and long enough, lost all of last year to get all that dealt with. I want to get that smoothed out so we're actually doing pumping tests the way they should be done.
So, you've done a number of these projects. Can you tell us about one that went just completely south? Drillers, I hear a lot of folks that want to do this kind of work, and they need to, go in clear-eyed. What can happen? What can go wrong?
Well, I must say that we didn't have any that didn't go completely south, but we've had some long and painful areas. One was, one of the very first ones we did. We happened to pick a place that was the most logistically challenging you could imagine to do one of our first major projects. Again, it was over the river where there's only certain times a year you can get there. There's nothing else around. There's no water, and they decide to build masonry and all that. So when we go over to this place where we have to chop in with machetes to get a drilling rig in, and then what they did is when they went in, they managed to drop the compressor truck down onto its axle and break the axle. So, we got off to a really good start. Then these are these Indian guys we worked with, and that everything went pretty good. We got the water we needed, but then we realized that they'd only drilled a 5 1/4 diameter borehole, and we couldn't put 6-inch casing in it. They never intended to put all the 6-inch casing in it. So a year later, we had to go back and with another company, and we ended up drilling it out, putting all the casing in. The reason we had to do that is because you run the borehole camera in, you look down there, there's a whole forest of roots and termite tunnels down that borehole within a year. So that's one reason why we had to seal it off better than it was. But that's one we had to do. And another was place we drilled. Realize people have been living here for tens of thousands of years and running cattle and everything else, and there's no soil. And you drilled this well, and it had this tremendously high nitrate content. And so we're working on that. And another one, fluoride is another one up in the north, very high fluoride, where we've been trying to work on water treatment for a couple of years, and I think we might get it right. But there's a lot of this never quite get to the end of it sort of job, but there's never been any that have just completely gone belly up. I've heard of some that others where they just buried a rig in some of that basalt up along Mount Kilimanjaro, which is very, very treacherous, and so but that's not been our experience.
That's wild. So we drill to make water come out of the ground for that rewarding spiritual feeling we get. And we just talked about problematic projects. What was a job that you've done over the last, years, or your favorite job that made an impact to an area that was beyond anything you ever expected?
Yeah, well, I wish I was there to see it, but I haven't been. But we had a little test job starting in 2019 with water missions in the West, along along the western border where the refugee camps. And that turned into steady work for all 2020, for example. They just pretty much were out there the whole time. And that's, they're getting water for the refugees and for the villages around the area that have never had that. And that's been very rewarding to realize, we're a small cog in this sort of thing. It's they've been very good to work with, and it's just very, very rewarding that way. That's one of those places where we're really glad we had casing advancement, because that stuff out there it's layers of metamorphic, and with soft stuff in between, and everything collapses, and so, and plus there's some artesian. We had some of that, but I wish I was there for that, because I'm not satisfied with how that's going right now. On one job we have, they don't seem to know how to finish an artesian well.
It's tough to finish artesian wells, and if you're using casing advance into that, I can expect, it's also went from a comfortable job to a very wet, water everywhere splashing and whatnot, right?
Yeah, it was when they were airlifting, it was like 130 gallons per minute, and so there's a lot of water there. And what I want them to do is basically just back off the strike and put a louver casing in it and be done with it, and put a pump in it. But I think they tried to stuff the plastic casing in it and filter pack, and it just boom, comes back. So,
like a missile.
Yeah.
All right. Well, with that, we will wrap up today's episode. Thanks again, Stuart. So I want to revisit something you mentioned. You had talked about how, in response to our question about regulations, you were talking about how, some folks have this imagery of countries outside of the U.S. being just, primitive. And that's definitely not the case here. And I think it's interesting for folks that are going to be doing this kind of work to understand that then when they're going into it, they need to respect local regulations, local traditions, learn a little bit of Swahili, that kind of thing. So Brock, what did you find interesting?
The entire process of trying to innovate the drilling process, when we here in the States do a lot of things the same way. But I really enjoyed when Stuart mentioned about, hand pumps versus solar pumps, and that the mothers and the daughters are out there pumping. And, again, our American ego, there's a big chunk of the world that their day is spent going and getting water and bringing it back to the home. And I have a good friend that would say, the men are taking a nap under the shade tree while the daughters and sisters and mothers are going to get everything for cooking and cleaning and whatnot. And being able to provide water and make that distance closer and change a universe for all of those people is just, it's beautiful. So thank you, Stuart, for volunteering to do that.
Yeah, and in defense of African men, it's that used to be a thing, but as things became more mechanical, they're becoming more involved. It's more interesting, and again, not make religious whatever, but among Christian communities, men tend to be more involved in domestic work than before. And they've made a good example that way. So it's help. Things are changing. Education changes things. It's a lot, but it is kind of different sometimes to see that. I like the hand pumps. That's sort of an NGO thing, where you can do a lot. The attitude is you can do a lot more wells if you're doing hand pumps because they only cost $800 instead of $3,000. And by the way, stuff like that is expensive there. Pumps and pumps are expensive compared to the United States. And so you really want to put in good, that's another thing I believe is you got to put quality from the very beginning, because chances are the money's going to dry up to ever replace stuff at any particular place you're working on. So if you're somebody budgeting to do something like that, it's got to be right from the beginning. And we're still working out the ongoing maintenance, how that goes. That's difficult to get that done. So we can go on for hours, but
thank you for what you do.
All right. Well, thanks again to Stuart Smith. And where can our audience find out more about you, Stuart?
Well, let's see. I've variety of sites. Groundwater Science has a website, which is groundwaterscience.com. I'm on Twitter at GWS Hydros. And Groundwater Tanzania also is on Twitter at Groundwater Tan 1. I don't know why we got that, but Groundwater Tan 1.
Okay, well, you can find fresh episodes of the show on our website or on Apple Podcasts every other week. Search Drilling Insight and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Visit thedriller.com for the latest industry news and views, and don't forget to also follow us on the usual social media channels. So until next time, this is Drilling Insight.